So, Reid, obviously everyone is talking about AI, and specifically, a lot of people are wondering how we should regulate this new technology, if at all. And so, how would you characterize how the US and other governments are regulating AI, and what would you like to see more of?
Well, the good news, unlike typical technology regulation issues, is that a lot of very good progress has been made and is heading in good ways. So obviously, while I'm a massive fan of the Biden administration on many different fronts, for what they're doing for everyday Americans, I think the leading dog in this race so far is the UK. I think the UK setting up the AI Safety Institute and kind of getting off the ground has been spectacular. Now, Secretary Raimondo came over and helped with that because part of one of the things that is obvious is just awesome about her capabilities is she goes, look, we just have to get the job done. We have to make sure that we're benefiting Americans. It's not about a foot race for who does what first, but is that we all like that Americans get there in a really good way. And obviously, our ally countries and our partners, part of the role of America always is to play a great catalyst and partner and enabler. And Secretary Raimondo does that. But the UK AI Safety Institute, got funded. We're still working on the funding for ours. This is one of the challenges that we have of separation of, the three branches of government and making that happen. So it's not, Secretary Raimondo's fault, but the US is working very closely and playing a global role, but is kind of next in line. Now, that being said, both the US and the UK were enormously benefited by Biden's process to the executive order, which was first, call the companies in, spend a lot of time in intense dialogue, get a set of voluntary commitments, derive from those voluntary commitments what are the right things to do that protect against risks while encouraging and getting the innovation where our capabilities will be greater in the future. Then looking at those and going, okay, well, what is the thing that we can move on quickly, hence executive order, because it's a subset of the things that you could potentially do, because it's the things that the Biden administration is very careful about, like, where do the Constitution and rule of law give us our powers, which are things that we can do that are legal and operational. So we'll do these, but they're based off the voluntary commitments, but now across all U.S. companies and how they're playing a global role. And then that, of course, creates the stage for how Congress can talk about this, what kinds of things can happen, what are the considerations. And then when you get to other governments also in the world that are doing, good work, Macron and the French are going to have a kind of safety summit coming up. They've been playing a very good job within the, kind of within the European context about like saying, hey, look, let's innovate in the future and innovate into the right integration into society versus try to stop the future. Too often the regulation is like, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. Let's try to make as little of the future happen as possible and as slowly as possible, which is the general kind of European regulatory response on this stuff. And instead it's like, look, there's so many different benefits we can get, medical assistants, tutors, industry, cognitive industrial revolution. Let's be playing forward. And fortunately, that's also being shown out within a set of startups within Paris and the kind of the French economy and outside of the US, China, and London. Paris is the next place that is, and obviously their work is to get into equal contention with London. Is the next place where it's like, well, we're building stuff, and like executives in all industries want to talk about AI, and they want to say like, how do we get, the AI companies providing the industry and providing the society, and what kinds of things we can be doing. And this is exactly the kind of thing that the government encouragement has been enabling and has been helping shape. And so this is the reason why it's good, across, not just the U.S. and Secretary Raimondo's, excellent leadership, but also the UK and France, and the work that's going on in the G7. We saw, one of the surprising things is the first time a pope has addressed the G7, because Pope Francis, back in 2015, 2016, was already like, okay, what is this AI thing? What does it mean? How do I help on a positive basis? And so has already been working on it, and so was in a place that when the G7 said this is what we're going to meet on, they could invite, Pope Francis, and Pope Francis could come and say, here's the things that we've already been doing within the Vatican context, and here's the things that we think are important questions, important considerations. And again, navigating the risks is super important, but part of navigating the risks is getting to this, really amazing future possibilities. And obviously, part of how Pope Francis has been playing into this is say, look, the most natural thing within the developed worlds and technology companies and everything else is to play for the wealthy markets. How do you build these services for the wealthy countries? And he's like, look, let's make sure that we're providing at equal time and equal capability to the global south, to many other markets that don't have the same rich economies, but could be benefited in their industries and their services, medical services, tutor services, education. Make sure that questions around climate change and market participation or other things that are front and center. And by the way, not only the countries, but also all of the people in the countries, even the low-income people in the countries. And Pope Francis and the Vatican has been consistent in that in conversations I've had with them since 2016 of saying, let's make sure that these are front and center considerations. So overall, this is one of the areas where work has already started. It's making good progress. It's in motion. There's obviously still more work to do, but some of the governments that we care about are in motion in smart ways.
It seems that, as with so much in our sort of dialogue these days, it's either black or white. It's either people saying zero government regulation ever, which seems pretty silly on the AI front, or way too much, and we're going to stifle innovation, just like you said. We're going to slow down. We're not going to get the growth to a medical assistant that we need. And I feel like a lot of people are making comparisons to social media. And some people think we got social media wrong. The government should have stepped in more and regulated more. Is that leading to people sort of overreacting and calling for too much government regulation because they're comparing it to the social media issue? Or how do you compare those two?
Well, it's definitely leading to the vigorous call to arms to strongly regulate, because they went, look, we now know that there were clear problems with social media, and we could have done something in advance. Now, the problem is most of the stuff we wouldn't have known in advance. And so even in the social media call is actually, in fact, the wrong call. Now, if you said, well, what would you do if you called your younger selves and said, do something on social media? What you'd probably say is work to be more vigorous about how you're protecting potential harms from children. Now, maybe we didn't fully notice it until the pandemic happened, and that all intensified it. And that's part of the reason why even that phone call to our younger selves might not have been, kind of fully accurate, but that would be the phone call you'd say is like, if you could make a quick phone call and say, hey, start early, you'd probably start on that kind of thing. Because, generally speaking, when you're looking at technology in the future, you could list out 200 things. And the question is, could you pick the 1 to 3 that actually really mattered? And you said, well, the way to pick the 1 to 3 really matters is do all 200. It's like, oh, then let's just not have any innovation. Let's not go to the future. And they said, well, but I know the right one. It's like, yeah, you and the other 1,000 people each have your right 1 or 2, and you have this mayhem of discussion around it. So that's the balance of these things. And that's part of the reason why when you get to the AI side, it's like, look, let's try to be focused and short on what the really key things are that are the only things that are absolutely critical to get right. Because most often, most of the things you're listing are actually naturally come out from the regulations, naturally kind of play out. And that's part of the reason why, what the Biden administration has done with the voluntary regulations and executive order, exactly right, is big. Let's be very focused. And then on the thou shalts and shalt nots, it's like, well, let's make it be that you're working on red teaming and alignment, and let's make sure that you're reporting on it, and let's make sure that you're telling us when you're doing things that are of a certain scale that might have some implication. And let's just start there, right, in terms of the kinds of things that we're doing. And it's exactly right, because people say, well, we should go and tell them exactly what they should do and they shouldn't do. It's like, well, not only do anybody in the government, anybody in regulation not know that, even the industry doesn't even really know that. The experts don't even really know that. So you have to kind of proceed in dialogue towards it. And that's the reason why, asking questions, getting reports, tell us what you're doing, tell us what you're learning. That is actually, in fact, the right approach, which is, of course, the reason why the US and UK AI, safety institutes are the right kinds of things to stand up, is to have organizations that are in dialogue, that are, kind of persistent outside of, just the usual politicking that happens, which is, shocker. Politicians want to grandstand on whatever the current media issue is. And that doesn't really help us as a society, let alone as industries and companies in terms of doing that. But, standing up these outside institutions that would be persistent, gathering knowledge, talking to academia, talking to industry, talking to leadership, talking to special interest groups, talking to other kinds of things to say, okay, what are the right issues? And let's start from a learn basis and from a watching basis and kind of go, oh, this may end up turning into the one really serious issue. Maybe we should intensify our dialogue first, really much about that, and then kind of see how it's playing out and see how it plays out within, the large scale companies, the startups, global competition and all the rest. And that's the reason why I think it is intensified, because I've literally heard such absurd things like the same people who brought us social networks are bringing us AI, and that's why we should have some mistrust. And you're like, well, actually, in fact, a lot of the people who are building AI weren't building social networks. There's so much seeing red that they go, well, Meta's doing AI and it's a social network. And you're like, okay, there's one. And now, of course, Elon is doing his thing too, with Twitter. But Elon's Twitter, which I think has a lot of problems around, bots and, virulent attack speech on women and a bunch of other things that are real problems that should be addressed. And, I think it's a travesty in the media circle that that's not what's being talked about. But that's not the old school. He wasn't the person who brought Twitter to you in the first place, right? But he's now building AI too. Anyway, so it's just like they see red and they don't understand that actually, in fact, they're actually just different problems. And the principles that you can learn from the social network side are not really have only incidental things about what we're doing on the AI side.
Possible is produced by Wonder Media Network. It's hosted by Ari Finger and me, Reid Hoffman. Our showrunner is Sean Young. Possible is produced by Katie Sanders, Edie Allard, Sarah Schleid, Adrian Bain, and Paloma Moreno Jimenez. Jenny Kaplan is our executive producer and editor.
Special thanks to Surya Yalamanchili, Saida Sepieva, Ian Ellis, Greg Beato, Ben Rellis, Parth Patil, and Little Monster Media Company.